Please join me in welcoming Tom Dalrymple.
Let's see if I can belt it out as well as Andrew did. So, well, hello everyone.
Hi, Tom.
Glad you're all here. Good afternoon. So I'm going to share a little bit about this book, and got to follow my notes because I'm nervous. But yeah, so since actively becoming pro-life several years ago, I began to have many passionate conversations with people in my family, my friends. I'm sure you've had the same experience.
Yeah.
Talking to them about abortion. And, I thought, okay, surely everyone would be pro-life if only they knew all these things that we all know, if only they heard the facts. And little did I know how quickly that this approach turns people off, and in some cases, and maybe you've experienced this too, I have damaged relationships with people who are important to me. And that's something that I really don't want to happen anymore. So I've been reading a lot, and I realized over time, maybe it's not a mellowing with age, but it's realizing that we need to master how to have conversations, right? We need to master how to have conversations with others where we can be persuasive without putting the other person on the defensive.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah.
So I'm here to share with you something that I think will make a big difference in how each of us dialogues with others about abortion. And so this fall I picked up a copy of this new book that Holly mentioned, Trent Horn, Persuasive Pro-life, How to Talk About Our Culture's Toughest Issue, and I started reading. I've read it twice. And I found that Trent's conversational approach to sharing the pro-life view, which is based upon his own experience working on college campuses, I found it to be very compelling, and I knew I had to share it with everyone with 40 Days for Life, and as far as I can take it. So, of course, what's at stake? I think that everyone here knows what's at stake. But certainly in our culture, it's up for grabs, right? Pro-choice advocates assert that abortion is merely harmless surgery. It's like pulling a tooth. Who has a problem with that? But if we're right, if pro-life advocates are correct, then abortion ends the life of an innocent human being. And pro-choicers are guilty of defending the killing of millions of people. I firmly believe that we're on the side of truth. And if we're to change our country to a culture of life, then we need to make these arguments persuasively and gracefully, one conversation at a time. So I'll share some tips from the book, and hopefully it will pique your interest. So Trent begins with a discussion of how to be ambassadors for the pro-life view, and he shares 4 or 5 tips from his experience. So hopefully these will ring true for you. Don't be weird.
What does that mean?
All right.
What does that mean?
That one got a really good chuckle.
What does that mean, Tom? Weird is weird to different people.
So, yeah. All right, so there's a broad realm of normal in our society. But he gives the example, and many of us have heard of Abby Johnson, right? And her conversion story, and how she talked about before 40 Days for Life, there was a guy that would be outside of the clinic dressed as the Grim Reaper. Right? That's pretty weird. And he went away when 40 Days for Life came and brought the loving approach that we bring to the sidewalk. But we also, just every day we need to be approachable, right? If we're not approachable, then how can we be effective? How can we be ambassadors? How can we talk to people? So another tip is to make our evidence bulletproof, right? We need to know our stuff. And I think the speakers we've had here through the years have really helped. And you also have to be willing to admit when you don't know something, right? You have to be willing to admit that you can go and find out more later. And so don't be afraid to admit that. And don't forget to follow up, or I'll come and find you and make sure you do. A third suggestion is to use questions instead of statements, right? So questions do two things. They're disarming. They don't feel like you're being lecturing to someone. And then they make the other person do the heavy lifting, right? They make the other person do the work of defending their view. And so great questions are like, well, why do you believe that? Or what do you believe? Or what makes you think it's true? You know, put the other person in the role where they have to defend their view. Another tip is actually listen. Try to be aware that there may be more meaning behind what someone is saying, right? Maybe they're suffering from a past abortion. And so when you're throwing facts out, you know, and you're like a machine, and just watch the faces, look for cues that maybe you need to step back and listen better and see what they're saying. And number 5, and this is something that we probably have to work on, is agree whenever possible, right? Build common ground and then build from there. Because that's another part of making ourselves approachable and reasonable so that we establish that rapport and can have deeper conversations. So now that these ground rules are established, we can get into the meaty contents of the book. And what I really enjoyed was how Trent, he does this by breaking down pro-choice arguments and then grouping them in different categories. So when you have conversations with people, you can listen to what they're saying and you can identify, okay, this is the type of objection that this person has. And so if I understand what their objection is, I can help to address that through our conversation. And so he has 3 main sections in the book: people who avoid the main issue, people who deny that the unborn matter, and people with tough questions. So let's look at that first category, people who avoid the main issue, right? This includes people that he calls pragmatists, the tolerant, and distractors. Right, so when you talk to someone about abortion, right, the first thing they don't say is, oh, I think abortion should be legal because a fetus is not a human being. Usually they say, oh, well, they don't even talk about that at all, right? They talk about, oh, well, abortion should be legal because there's some important reason for it. They're pragmatic. They think that abortion is the most practical solution for hardships that we see in our lives, like an unintended pregnancy. So Trent spells out what we've heard before when Scott Klusendorf has been with us, which is the trot out a toddler technique. And he lays it out in 4 steps, and I'll go through an example. So these are agree, apply, ask why, and ah. So here's a conversation that you might have. I've had some success with this. I even had a candidate for judge show up at my door in Oakwood, and I was able to go through this argument with him and conversation, and his son was there and was becoming terribly flustered because he couldn't figure out how to get out of this argument. So anyway, so
knocked on your door.
yeah, it's great when they come to you. But yeah, so maybe your conversation might go like this. A pro-choicer says, well, what about women who are too poor to take care of a child? Right? The first step, agree. Like, okay, I agree. It's a really hard thing to care for a child when you're poor. And I can really appreciate that a woman who's in a situation like this might be considering an abortion. She might be really agonizing over it. But let me ask you a question. And maybe your interlocutor will say, okay. So then you lay it out, right? Okay. Suppose that a woman has a 2-year-old and just lost her job. She now feels she can no longer care for her child. Should she be allowed to kill the 2-year-old? So this is the application, right? And then the other person, most of the time, will say, what? No, of course not. So this is the ask why part. Well, I know this might seem like a dumb question, but Why can't she kill her 2-year-old? At which point the pro-choice person most likely will say, because the 2-year-old is a human being. Ah, I see where you're coming from. I think this shows that poverty, while important, is not the main issue. If it is wrong to kill an impoverished 2-year-old, and the unborn are just as human as a 2-year-old, then wouldn't it be wrong to kill an impoverished unborn child? The pro-choice person might come back with, oh, that's different. A 2-year-old is a human, but a fetus isn't. But this is exactly where we want the conversation to go, right? We want the question to be answered is, what is the unborn? So Trent lays that out in the book, and he expands upon it, and he gives a lot of other examples that are useful in our everyday conversations. The next section of the book talks about people who deny that the unborn matter. He calls these skeptics, disqualifiers, and autonomists. The main issue here for skeptics is that outlawing abortion is wrong because no one can agree on whether the unborn child is a human being. So our objective is to show that there is no doubt that the unborn child is a biological human being, and that the debate over the status of an unborn child involves philosophy, not science. So in the book, he highlights an approach also put out by Steve Wagner that's called the 10-second pro-life apologist. So as the story goes, Steve was flustered because he couldn't defend his pro-life views in a conversation that took him by surprise, so he went home and he came up with this, and in 10 seconds goes something like this. Well, if it's growing, isn't it alive? And if it has human parents, isn't it human? And if human beings are like you and me are valuable, then aren't the unborn as well? So again, look at how these questions, they focus on the question, what is the unborn? So once you've established this scientific basis for the humanity and the unborn, you can move into the ways that the unborn are different. The way that none of those differences justify taking their life. So Trent, and he borrows from our past speaker, Scott Klusendorf, who will also be at the Elizabeth's New Life banquet this spring. And I highly recommend attending that. But they cite a philosopher named Stephen Schwartz, and he argues that there's only 4 main differences between born and unborn humans. And the acronym SLED helps us to summarize these and remember these. So remember SLED: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. So just as we might ask someone who's a racist why skin color matters about making someone valuable, we might ask why these disqualifiers, ask them why these SLED differences make a difference as to someone's value. So we must make the pro-choice proponent defend their view of personhood and show why it's superior to the pro-life view that says that all human beings are equal. And so this technique follows a simple pattern, which is to affirm the difference in one of those SLED categories, ask the critic what a person is or why this difference is what makes someone a person, and then show that the difference has nothing to do with being a person, because some born people are different in these same ways. So for example, maybe someone is okay with abortion because the fetus does not yet have a fully developed brain. At this point, you might point out that infants and also teenagers do not have fully developed brains.
So true.
And yet, we seem to treat them with respect. We protect their lives from all kinds of harm. And so we have to show this analogy then, right? That just because an embryo or a fetus is a less developed stage of human life, that this other stage does not justify taking their life by abortion. And if you listen very carefully in conversations, you can identify these 4 SLED categories in your conversations, and you can very quickly and calmly lead the conversation where you want it to go. The third main section of the book deals with people with tough questions, and these come up on occasion. One tough question that comes up frequently in the media and in conversations, especially during political seasons, is the case of abortion in the case of rape. So here is one key that we can do better on. We want people to know how much pro-lifers care about women who are in this situation. So don't be weird, right? Talk to them. Let them know how horrified we are that women have to go through this and be in this kind of situation. Tell them how upsetting it is, right? That many times these cases of rape are unreported. If you're Catholic, one thing I learned is in the Catechism. The Universal Catechism of the Catholic Church says that rape is intrinsically evil, is always evil. So once you've shared this in a conversation, and if it seems appropriate to go back to it, then you go back, right, to the unborn. You can point out that the Supreme Court in 2008 made it illegal to punish rapists with the death penalty. So why is it that the unborn should receive the death penalty for the sin of the father?
It's illegal to punish the rape with the death penalty. I didn't know that. That's awful.
So these are some really straightforward approaches that in conversations we can open people's eyes, right, to the pro-life view, and to help to show that we need to find ways to help women and their children. So I hope by now that you're getting the idea that reading this book and studying it is time well spent. I think Trent Horn has done a great job of pulling together the best of the pro-life arguments of our time and demonstrating them in a way that can be used in daily conversations. And I have just skimmed the surface in this presentation of the 200 plus pages of the book. So I will add one more thing, which is that Trent works for Catholic Answers, and they have a radio show called Catholic Answers Live. If you go to Catholic.com, you can search in the search bar for "Why Are You Pro-Choice?" And you can listen to him use these techniques from the book in conversations with callers that call into this show. And I've listened to probably a dozen of these, and they are absolutely incredible. There will often be times in the show when a person, knowing where Trent is going, will refuse to answer a question because they know that they will have to admit that the unborn are human beings and deserve a right to life. So in closing, our team has picked up 60 copies of Persuasive Pro-life to distribute at the rally. If you'd like to give a donation of $10, that's how much we paid for the books. We also have 150 smaller pamphlets that were generously provided by the team and by Catholic Answers. And so I give thanks to them. And so please take them, give them to your pastors, give them to your friends, and use the information and arguments to change hearts and minds of the people you know, one conversation at a time. Thank you, and God bless.